It is 9:21 in the evening on November 21st, 1916. In his iron bed at Schönbrunn Palace, Emperor Franz Joseph I of Austria-Hungary takes his final breath. He is 86 years old. He has ruled for 68 years, longer than any Habsburg before him, and longer than most of his subjects have been alive. His empire spans 13 nations and 52 million people. His dynasty has worn crowns for more than 600 years. His last words were instructions for the following morning. Tomorrow at 3, it was his usual waking time. He never wakes again. But Franz Joseph's death does not end the Habsburg story. It begins its most dramatic chapter. Within 2 years, his successor will lose everything. The throne, the empire, the palaces, and ultimately his life at 34 years old. The children born to inherit the greatest dynasty in Europe will instead inherit exile, poverty, and a century of wandering. Crown Prince Otto, just 9 years old, will watch his father die on a remote Atlantic island, then be raised to restore the dynasty, only to sign away his birthright for the chance to set foot in his homeland. Empress Zita, widowed at 29, will wear mourning black for the next 67 years. Archduke Felix, born at Schönbrunn and christened by Franz Joseph himself, will be banned from Austria for his entire life. And the youngest daughter, Elizabeth, will be born 2 months after her father's death, named by a dead man who somehow knew she would be a girl. This is what happened to the Habsburg bloodline after the empire fell, and how the children of the last emperor went from inheriting the greatest throne in Europe to raising their own children on dandelion salads in Canadian exile. The Habsburgs had ruled since 1273. By the time Franz Joseph died in 1916, they had worn crowns for nearly 650 years. They had held the throne of the Holy Roman Empire for 4 centuries. At their height, they ruled Spain, the Netherlands, half of Italy, Austria, Hungary, Bohemia, and colonies stretching from the Philippines to Peru. Their motto was simple: let others wage war. You, happy Austria, mere. They built their empire not primarily through conquest, but through strategic marriages, absorbing kingdoms the way other dynasties absorbed provinces. By 1916, the empire had contracted considerably from its greatest extent, but it remained formidable. Austria-Hungary ruled over Austrians, Hungarians, Czechs, Slovaks, Poles, Ukrainians, Romanians, Croats, Slovenes, Serbs, and Italians. It was the second largest country in Europe by area and the third largest by population. Franz Joseph had held this fractious collection of peoples together through sheer longevity, the weight of tradition, and his own relentless dedication to duty. But his reign had been marked by tragedy after tragedy. His brother Maximilian, installed as Emperor of Mexico with French backing, was captured by Republican forces and executed by firing squad in 1867. His only son, Crown Prince Rudolf, died in a murder-suicide with his teenage mistress at the Mayerling hunting lodge in 1889. A scandal the court tried desperately to suppress. His wife, the beautiful and melancholic Empress Elizabeth, was stabbed through the heart by an Italian anarchist on a Geneva quayside in 1898. And his nephew and heir, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, was assassinated by a Serbian nationalist in Sarajevo on June 28, 1914. It was the spark that ignited the First World War. By November 1916, Franz Joseph had outlived almost everyone he had ever loved. He was a relic of a vanished age, still rising at 3 each morning, still working at his desk for 12 hours a day, still wearing the simple uniform of an infantry officer. He had become the empire itself. And when he died, the empire began to die with him. The throne passed not to a son or grandson, but to a grandnephew. Franz Ferdinand's children had been excluded from the succession because his wife was not of sufficient royal blood. a morganatic marriage that denied his descendants any claim. This meant the crown fell to Archduke Karl, the 29-year-old son of Franz Joseph's deceased nephew. Karl had never expected to rule. He had been third in line until Franz Ferdinand's assassination just 2 years earlier. He was utterly unprepared to inherit a crumbling empire in the middle of a catastrophic war. Karl's wife was Zita of Bourbon-Parma, a 24-year-old princess from a minor Italian duchy with excellent French connections. They had married in 1911 and were genuinely devoted to each other, which was unusual in an age of arranged royal marriages. By November 1916, they already had 4 children. Crown Prince Otto was born in 1912, Archduchess Adelheid in 1914, Archduke Robert in 1915, and Archduke Felix in May 1916. Felix was christened in the presence of Emperor Franz Joseph just months before the emperor's death. 4 more children would follow: Karl Ludwig in 1918, Rudolf in 1919, Charlotte in 1921, and Elizabeth in 1922. These children entered the world as archdukes and archduchesses of Austria, princes and princesses of Hungary, Bohemia, and a dozen other kingdoms. They lived in Schönbrunn Palace, a residence of 1,441 rooms, larger than Versailles. They were surrounded by armies of servants, chamberlains, tutors, and nursemaids. They ate from gold plates and observed ancient court rituals dating back to the Spanish Habsburgs of the 16th century. They had never seen the inside of a shop, a restaurant, or an ordinary home. Their world was as insulated from common life as a monastery on the moon, but that world was already crumbling. By late 1916, Austria-Hungary was losing the war. Food shortages plagued the cities, and military defeats mounted on every front. The various nationalities within the empire, Czechs, Poles, and South Slavs, were demanding independence with increasing urgency. Karl inherited not a throne, but a catastrophe in progress. Even the mightiest dynasty must eventually face the arithmetic of history. 600 years of Habsburg rule were about to collapse in just 24 months. And the children born to wear crowns would instead learn what it meant to be hunted, exiled, and forgotten. Karl was crowned King of Hungary on December 30th, 1916, in a ceremony at Budapest's Matthias Church. He immediately began seeking a way out of the war through his wife's brothers, Prince Sixtus and Prince Xavier of Bourbon-Parma, who were serving in the Belgian army. Karl initiated secret peace negotiations with France. In a letter dated March 24, 1917, Karl acknowledged France's just claims to Alsace-Lorraine and expressed a willingness to negotiate, a position that would have required betraying his German allies. The negotiations failed. Italy demanded territorial concessions that Austria could not accept, and the talks collapsed. But the affair did not end there. In April 1918, French Premier Georges Clemenceau publicly released Karl's secret letters, seeking to drive a wedge between the Central Powers. The scandal humiliated Karl and effectively ended Austrian independence. From that point forward, Germany controlled Habsburg military strategy and much of the economy. By the autumn of 1918, the empire was disintegrating faster than anyone had predicted. On October 16th, Karl issued his October Manifesto, proposing to transform Austria into a federation of autonomous national states under the Habsburg crown. It was a desperate gamble, and it came far too late. Within days, Czechoslovakia declared independence. Then the South Slavs announced they were forming their own state. Then German Austria proclaimed itself a separate republic. On November 11, 1918, the same day the guns fell silent on the Western Front, Karl signed a carefully worded declaration at Schönbrunn Palace. He renounced all participation in the affairs of state, but he deliberately avoided the word abdication. He never accepted that he had lost the throne, only that circumstances had temporarily prevented him from exercising his powers. 2 days later, he signed a similar declaration for Hungary. The Republic of German Austria was proclaimed on November 12th, and the Hungarian Republic followed on November 16th. The family that had ruled Central Europe for 6 centuries found themselves huddled in a hunting lodge in Lower Austria, surrounded by armed guards who might have been protectors or captives. No one was entirely sure. The imperial family spent the winter of 1918 to 1919 at Schloss Eckartsau, a Habsburg hunting estate east of Vienna. It was a cold, uncertain time. Revolutionary soldiers roamed the countryside. The new Republican government was suspicious of the former emperor. There was real danger that Karl might be arrested, tried, or worse. Salvation came from an unlikely source. King George V of Britain ordered Lieutenant Colonel Edward Lyle Strutt to escort the Habsburg family safely out of Austria. On March 23, 1919, the family boarded a train bound for Switzerland. As the train crossed the border at Feldkirch on March 24, 1919, Karl issued one final proclamation, the Feldkirch Manifesto, revoking his earlier renunciation and declaring all Republican decisions null and void. This act of defiance triggered immediate retaliation. On April 3, 1919, the Austrian Parliament passed the Habsburg Law. It was one of the most comprehensive expropriations of royal power and property in European history. The law permanently dethroned the House of Habsburg-Lorraine. It banished Karl and his immediate family forever. It confiscated all court property, family funds, and assets without any compensation whatsoever. Other Habsburg family members could return to Austria only by signing written declarations renouncing all dynastic claims and swearing loyalty to the Republic. Overnight, the Habsburgs lost Schönbrunn Palace, the Hofburg, the Belvedere, and dozens of other residences. They lost the imperial treasury with its crown jewels, the Holy Lance, and the world's largest cut emerald. They lost their income, their staff, their securities, their art collections. The wealthiest family in Central Europe became, in the stroke of a pen, refugees dependent on the charity of foreign governments. The family settled in Switzerland, first at Schloss Vorteg near Rorschach, then at Villa Prangens on Lake Geneva. But Karl could not accept his fate. He still believed he could reclaim his throne, or at least the Hungarian half of it. In March 1921, Karl made his first attempt to restore himself as King of Hungary. He traveled in disguise, using a forged Spanish passport, wearing a false name and a shaved mustache. On Easter Sunday, he appeared at the royal palace in Budapest and confronted Miklos Horthy, the regent who governed Hungary in the king's name. Karl announced he was ready to resume his duties. Horthy refused. Czechoslovakia, Romania, and Yugoslavia, the Little Entente, had declared that any Habsburg restoration would be treated as an act of war. Horthy would not risk it. Karl was forced to leave, fell seriously ill during the journey, and was expelled from Hungary on April 5th. But Karl tried again. On October 20th, 1921, he and Zita, now pregnant with their 8th child, flew from Zurich to western Hungary in a small aircraft. This time, Karl had military support. Approximately 2,000 soldiers swore allegiance to him, and he began advancing toward Budapest by train. For a few days, it seemed possible that the restoration might succeed. Crowds cheered the royal couple. Units defected to Karl's side. The advance became a triumphal procession. It ended at Buda-Ors, on the outskirts of Budapest, on October 23rd. Horthy had deployed loyal troops and student paramilitaries to block the road. A brief skirmish broke out. 19 people were killed. Karl, unwilling to start a civil war, ordered his forces to cease fire. He was arrested and interned at Tihany Abbey on Lake Balaton. The Allied powers had seen enough. A Habsburg on any throne was intolerable. Britain, in particular, insisted that Karl be removed from Europe entirely. On November 1, 1921, Karl and Zita were placed aboard the British gunboat HMS Glowworm and transported down the Danube to the Black Sea. There they transferred to the cruiser HMS Cardiff. Their destination was Madeira, a Portuguese island in the Atlantic Ocean, far from any throne Karl might try to reclaim. The family arrived on Madeira on November 19, 1921. They lived first at Villa Vittoria in Funchal, then moved to the more modest Quinta do Monte in the hills above the city. Their children joined them in February 1922. The former rulers of 52 million people now occupied a damp, drafty house with inadequate heating. They had almost no money. The fortune that had once funded the largest court in Europe was gone. Karl caught a cold on March 9, 1922, while walking in Funchal. The cold developed into bronchitis. The bronchitis became severe pneumonia. The doctors could do little. Karl suffered 2 heart attacks as his condition worsened. On April 1, 1922, at the Quinta do Monte, Emperor Karl I of Austria and King Karl IV of Hungary died. He was 34 years old. 9-year-old Crown Prince Otto was at his bedside. So was Zita, now 30 years old, now a widow, now alone with 8 children, the youngest not yet born. Karl's last words were to his wife. He said, "I love you so much." He was buried in the Church of Our Lady of the Mount in Monte, Madeira. His heart was later removed and entombed at Muri Abbey in Switzerland. In 2004, Pope John Paul II beatified Karl at a Mass in St. Peter's Square, recognizing his Christian faith, his efforts to end the war, and his devotion to his family. His feast day is October 21st, the anniversary of his marriage to Zita. Zita of Bourbon Parma had been empress for 2 years and widow for 67. From the day Karl died until the day she herself died, she wore mourning black. She never remarried. She never stopped believing that her husband had been a saint and that their exile had been a monstrous injustice. Her journey through exile took her across 3 continents. After Madeira came Spain, where the royal family offered refuge at El Pardo Palace and then at Palacio Uribarren in the Basque Country. The children were educated there, learning Spanish alongside the German and French they already spoke. Then came Belgium, where the family settled at Stenokerzeel Castle near Brussels in 1929. The older children attended university. Life achieved a kind of stability. The Nazi invasion of 1940 shattered everything again. The Habsburgs were prominent anti-Nazi voices. Hitler had sentenced Otto to death in absentia and codenamed the annexation of Austria Operation Otto. So they had to flee. Zita and the children escaped through France to Spain, then to Portugal, and finally across the Atlantic to the United States. They settled first on Long Island, then at Tuxedo Park in New York. The American years were the hardest. The family that had lived in palaces now scraped by on almost nothing. At one point in Quebec City, Zita made salad from dandelion leaves gathered in the yard. The children took whatever work they could find. But Zita never complained, never wavered, never let her children forget who they were and what they had lost. After the war, Zita moved to Luxembourg to care for her aging mother, then settled in Zizers, Switzerland, where she would spend her final 3 decades. She was not permitted to enter Austria. The Habsburg law still applied, and Zita refused to sign any renunciation. She finally returned to Austria in 1982 at the age of 90. The restrictions had been eased just enough to allow her entry. She had not set foot on Austrian soil in 63 years. When she arrived, crowds gathered to see the last empress. Zita died on March 14, 1989, in Zizers. She was 96 years old. Her funeral was held on April 1st, deliberately scheduled on the anniversary of Karl's death, at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the hour he had died. It was a grand imperial ceremony. Over 6,000 guests attended the Requiem Mass at St. Stephen's Cathedral in Vienna. The same funeral coach that had carried Franz Joseph in 1916 carried Zita in 1989. She was buried in the imperial crypt beneath the Capuchin church, joining the ancestors of the man she had married 78 years before. Her heart was placed beside Karl's at Murray Abbey. Otto von Habsburg was 4 years old when his father became emperor, 9 when his father died, and 98 when he himself died in 2011. His life spanned almost the entire 20th century and the beginning of the 21st. Zita raised him to restore the dynasty. She educated him in languages, history, law, and politics. She taught him to believe that the abdication was invalid, that the Habsburg claim endured, and that one day he would wear his father's crown. Otto grew up handsome, intelligent, and charming. He earned a doctorate in political science. He spoke 8 languages fluently. He cultivated relationships with statesmen and politicians across Europe. The Nazis recognized him as a threat. When Germany annexed Austria in March 1938, the operation was codenamed after him. Hitler personally sentenced Otto to death in absentia. Otto spent the war years in America, meeting with President Roosevelt, advocating for a free Austria, and trying to organize resistance. After the war, restoration proved impossible. Austria was occupied by 4 powers, including the Soviet Union, and the new republic had no interest in bringing back the Habsburgs. Otto gradually shifted his focus from restoration to European integration. He became convinced that the nationalisms that had destroyed the Habsburg Empire and had then produced 2 world wars could only be overcome through a united Europe. In 1961, Otto made a fateful decision to enter Austria legally. He had to sign a declaration renouncing his membership in the House of Habsburg-Lorraine and his dynastic claims, and affirming his loyalty to the Republic. On May 31, 1961, he signed it. In his diary, he called the document Fetzen, Austrian slang for worthless rubbish. He did not believe it meant anything, but it meant he could finally go home. His return sparked the Habsburg crisis. When Otto entered Austria on October 31, 1966, his first time on Austrian soil in 48 years, the Socialist Party organized massive protests. 250,000 workers went on strike. The Constitutional Court became involved. For weeks, Austria was consumed by debate over whether a Habsburg could be trusted. Otto weathered the storm. He built a new career as a politician and advocate for European unity. He served as president of the International Pan-European Union for more than 3 decades. In 1979, he was elected to the European Parliament as a member of the Bavarian Christian Social Union. He served there for 20 years, advocating tirelessly for European integration, particularly the inclusion of Central and Eastern European countries after the fall of communism. Otto married Princess Regina of Saxe-Meiningen on May 10, 1951. They had 7 children: Andrea, Monica, Michaela, Gabriella, Walburga, Karl, and Georg. Regina died in February 2010. Otto followed her on July 4, 2011, at his home in Pöcking, Bavaria. He was 98 years old. His funeral was the last great Habsburg ceremony. His coffin was draped in the Habsburg flag. A mourning period of 13 days was observed across the former Austro-Hungarian lands. His body was entombed in the imperial crypt in Vienna on July 16, 2011. His heart was buried separately at Pannonhalma Abbey in Hungary, a final gesture of connection to the kingdom his father had tried so desperately to reclaim. Adelheid, the eldest daughter, was born in 1914 and never married. She worked as a journalist in Bavaria after the war and devoted herself to supporting her mother and maintaining family cohesion. She died in 1971. Zita was forbidden from attending the funeral, a cruel reminder of what exile meant. Robert, born in 1915, was designated head of the Austrian Este branch of the family at just 2 years old. He served in the Royal Air Force during the Second World War and later represented Habsburg interests in London. In 1953, he married Princess Margherita of Savoy-Aosta, uniting two exiled royal houses. His son, Lorenz, married Princess Astrid of Belgium in 1984 and now heads the Austrian Este line. Robert died in 1996 and is buried at Muri Abbey. Felix was born at Schönbrunn Palace on May 31, 1916, and was christened in the presence of Emperor Franz Joseph himself, one of the old emperor's last public acts. Felix pursued a military career, entering the Theresian Military Academy in 1937. He fled during the Anschluss and later served with his brother Karl Ludwig in the United States Army's 101st Infantry Battalion, the Free Austria Battalion. Felix never signed the renunciation required by the Habsburg law. He argued that forcing him to renounce his identity and heritage violated his fundamental human rights. The Austrian government disagreed. Felix was banned from Austria for his entire adult life. He was permitted to enter only once, for 3 days in April 1989, to attend his mother's funeral. He married Princess Anna Eugenie of Arenberg in 1952 and had 7 children. Felix died on September 6, 2011, in Mexico City, at 95 years old. He was the last surviving child of Karl and Zita. Karl Ludwig was born on March 10, 1918, the last child announced with a 101-gun salute, and the last child born while the empire still technically existed. Like Felix, he served in the American military during the war. In late 1944, he and his brother Rudolf undertook an extraordinary mission. They secretly entered Nazi-occupied Austria under false identities to join the O5 resistance network and help organize opposition to the regime. Karl Ludwig never renounced his Habsburg rights. He married Princess Yolande of Ligne in 1950, had 4 children, and died on December 11, 2007. He was buried in the imperial crypt with traditional Habsburg ceremonies. Rudolf, the first child born in exile, arrived on September 5, 1919, at Villa Prangens in Switzerland. He was less than a year old when his father made the first failed attempt to reclaim the Hungarian throne. Rudolf studied in Spain, Belgium, and Quebec, and like Karl Ludwig, smuggled himself into Austria in the final months of the war to support the resistance. He later worked as a banker on Wall Street. He married twice and had 5 children. Rudolf died in May 2010 at 90 years old. The 2 youngest daughters, both born in exile and too young to remember their father, lived very different lives. Charlotte was born on March 1, 1921, at Villa Prangens, just 1 month before Karl's first restoration attempt. She was only 1 year old when her father died on Madeira. Charlotte earned degrees from Laval University and Fordham University, then embarked on an unusual path for an imperial archduchess. She became a social worker in Manhattan's East Harlem, one of the poorest neighborhoods in New York City. To protect her identity and avoid publicity, she worked under the pseudonym Charlotte Eppinger for 13 years. She helped impoverished families while keeping her imperial background secret. In 1956, she married Georg, Duke of Mecklenburg. He died in 1963, leaving her a childless widow at 42. She returned to social work with Caritas in Munich. Charlotte died on July 23, 1989, just 4 months after her mother. Service and humility defined her life. She is buried at the chapel of Inzigkofen in Germany. Elizabeth was born on May 31, 1922, at the Royal Palace of El Pardo in Spain, 2 months after her father's death. Karl had chosen her name before he died, somehow knowing the baby would be a girl. She was named after Empress Elizabeth, the assassinated Sisi, who had been Franz Joseph's wife. Elizabeth was the eternal youngest, always standing at the end of the line in family photographs. She studied at Laval University during the war years, then married Prince Heinrich of Liechtenstein in 1949. They had 5 children and lived at Schloss Waldstein in Styria, Austria. Elizabeth was the only one of Karl and Zita's children to spend significant time living in Austria. The renunciation requirements had finally eased enough by then. Heinrich died in 1991. Elizabeth died on January 6, 1993, at 70 years old. The House of Habsburg did not end. It adapted. Karl von Habsburg, born in 1961, is the current head of the family. He is the son of Otto and Regina, and the grandson of the last emperor. His legal name in Austria is Karl Habsburg Lothringen. Noble titles remain illegal under Austrian law. He does not insist on being called Archduke. He has said that he does not refer to titles, and that he is not that vain. People use these titles out of respect for history and the role of his family in history. Karl served as a member of the European Parliament from 1996 to 1999. He holds a reserve commission as a captain in the Austrian Air Force. From 2008 to 2020, he led Blue Shield International, an organization dedicated to protecting cultural heritage during armed conflicts. In June 2024, despite recovering from cancer treatments, he hosted the 750th anniversary celebration of the Habsburg dynasty at Palais Ferstel in Vienna, commemorating the family's rise from minor Swiss counts to rulers of half of Europe. Karl's son, Ferdinand Zvonimir, born in 1997, is the heir apparent to the headship of the house, but he has chosen to seek a different kind of crown. Ferdinand is a professional racing driver. In 2021, he won the LMP2 class at the 24 Hours of Le Mans. He now competes in the hypercar category, driving for the Alpine team. When interviewers point out the irony of a Habsburg racing cars, Ferdinand shrugs it off. He remains a devout Catholic, active in youth ministry. He estimates there are approximately 600 living Habsburgs today. He told the New York Times that they have a WhatsApp group. Karl's daughter Eleanor, born in 1994, works as a gemologist and jewelry designer. In 2020, she married Jerome D'Ambrosio, a Belgian racing driver. Their son, born in October 2021, is named Otto after his great-great-grandfather, the last crown prince. Their daughter, born in August 2024, is named Zita, after the empress who held the family together through 67 years of mourning. Georg von Habsburg, Karl's younger brother, chose diplomacy. He served as Hungary's ambassador to France from 2020 to 2025, and currently serves as ambassador to Spain. Eduard Habsburg Lothringen, a great-great-grandson of Franz Joseph I, is Hungary's ambassador to the Holy See and has become a popular author and social media presence. In November 2025, the family revealed an extraordinary secret. The Florentine diamond, A legendary 137-carat yellow stone that had been part of the Habsburg crown jewels was not lost after all. For more than a century, the diamond was believed to have disappeared during the chaos of 1918. Perhaps stolen, perhaps sold, perhaps cut into smaller stones. The truth was simpler and stranger. On November 1st, 1918, as the empire collapsed, Karl had ordered certain jewels removed from the imperial treasury. They traveled with the family into exile. When Zita fled the Nazis in 1940, the jewels went with her to Canada. She deposited them in a bank vault in Quebec and requested that the location remain secret for 100 years after Karl's death. The family kept her wishes. In 2022, 100 years after Karl died on Madeira, the century of secrecy ended. The diamond and approximately 15 other family jewels emerged from a vault where they had lain untouched since the Second World War. The family plans to exhibit them in a Canadian museum as gratitude for the refuge that country provided during their darkest years. The Habsburgs lost their empire, but not their bloodline. They scattered across the world, reinvented themselves as politicians, diplomats, social workers, and racing drivers, and survived. 600 descendants spread across 3 continents, connected by WhatsApp, gathering occasionally for anniversaries and funerals. The palaces belong to the Republic now. The crown jewels are in museums. But the name endures, and the blood still flows. Not all royal families were so fortunate. Some dynasties did not merely lose their thrones. They lost everything, including their lives. Just 2 years after Karl signed away his participation in government, another emperor faced a similar choice. Tsar Nicholas II of Russia had abdicated in March 1917, hoping to save his family by surrendering his crown. He was wrong. In July 1918, in a basement in Yekaterinburg, the Bolsheviks executed Nicholas, his wife Alexandra, and all 5 of their children. The Romanov dynasty, which had ruled Russia for 300 years, ended not in exile, but in massacre. If you want to see what happened to the Tsar's family after he fell, and why none of them escaped, watch our video on the Romanovs.